Celtics head coach Brad Stevens expressed his frustration in what was easily the angriest we've seen him all season long. But before we break things down here, this segment is powered by The Athletic. Head over to theathletic.com/thegarden. You can read content from our boy over here, Clevis Murray, Jay King, and Jared Weiss. You get 40% off for less than $3 a month. That is theathletic.com/thegarden. Clevis, let's start with you, since you are the man of this segment, I guess. No pressure whatsoever.
No, a lot of pressure.
But let's start with you, Brad Stevens. Easily the angriest we've seen him all season long. Where do you feel his frustration is in terms of this group? Is it the younger guys? Is it the team as a whole? Yeah. Does he, upset with the starters? Like, what do you think he's going to do moving forward?
First off, I hope you guys are subscribed to The Athletic. And second of all, second of all,
you convinced me afterwards.
I think Brad's just upset with the execution of the team. He was talking about, like, Kyrie talked about it too. Guys weren't following the game plan. They're kind of ad-libbing. As you see in the Celtics, they have a lot of alley-oops off those cuts in the second half. But I think it's more about execution, just the game plan. I mean, Brad, this is the most we've seen Brad, I believe. We're probably the only 3 reporters that actually seen Brad leave the game early. I've never seen Brad get upset. He just stormed off the court. 1.8 seconds left after the team shot clock violation. Didn't even acknowledge his own team. Al Horford was talking about how he's never seen Brad like that. It was a sight to behold, but I think Brad's just upset because he knows his team can play better. Right. We all know this team can play better, and they're not playing to the standard that we know. I think it's just earlier in the season, back to back. I think we should really start judging this team around the All-Star break to see can changes be made, do they need to be made, and just so on.
There's legitimate concerns, though. I mean, obviously we saw Mad Brad. It was peak Mad Brad tonight. But we asked Al Horford at the end of the game, or after the game, in the locker room, what did he say to the team? And he was like, you know what, I'm going to keep it in here, but obviously he was not happy. So there's
probably ripped him a new one.
Probably. Yeah. And there's legitimate concerns, and Horford was the first to say that when they asked him about the flow of the offense. He was like, there's a lot of forcing going on in the offensive end, and there's legitimate concerns here. So I think it's not only Brad, but it trickles down to the locker room, and specifically on the offensive end. Of course, this was their worst offensive performance of the season after Friday night's best offensive performance of the season. So there's a consistency problem here.
Well, Chris, let's talk about what Kyrie Irving had to say after the game, because in the locker room he seems sort of passive in the sense that he's confident in this group that they can turn things around. I think Friday night's game obviously has a lot to do with it. I think you would have seen a completely different Kyrie Irving had they have lost that game, that overtime win over the Raptors, of course. So I think he's having a little more patience. Again, he reiterated the fact that he will be the most patient player in that locker room. Where do you feel like his head is at right now? Do you think that he may be a little too passive? Does he need to hold guys accountable at this point? What do you think about Kyrie right now?
It was kind of interesting post-game because he was sort of all over the place a little bit. He took a lot of the blame for himself, picking up 4 really early fouls and then ultimately a 5th in the third quarter, and he had to, I don't know how much time was left, but he had to take a seat pretty early on, and then it wasn't good from that point on. So he was tough on himself in that regard. But you're right, he was relatively passive when talking about some of the young guys on his team, and some people were talking, is there a question of veteran leadership here? And he took ownership. He's like, I'm a leader, and that starts with me, and tonight I obviously didn't do that. So that creates a problem, but I don't know if there's any splintering between vets and young guns here, but he was a little passive in saying some of the young guys who are now 1 year older are going to need to step up and start executing more. And he's probably talking about guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown who are not executing right now, specifically Jaylen Brown. He had another tough night tonight. So it's interesting. He was kind of all over the place, but I'm not really sure where his head's at. I couldn't really tell, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, with me, I think Jalen's just been struggling a lot this year. He hasn't really had that one stellar game or a few that just stood out. Tatum started hot in the season. He's kind of average. Tatum's not playing bad. But his shot selection is
still
kind of like the guy who he worked out with this summer, Kobe Bryant. He's taking a lot of long twos. I believe he's shooting over 27% on long twos, which is not the best stat.
Yeah, we talked about that Friday night.
Yeah.
And in this game, what surprised me was that we didn't see Tatum take advantage of those matchups that he could have easily taken advantage of.
It's like he didn't even
the
play.
Switches, the times where he's supposed to go inside. Exactly. He had guys on him that he could easily take to the rim. He elected to go for the outside shot, like you said, the mid-range.
Right.
And it's just been crushing him, I feel like, throughout this stretch.
It's almost like he's at like an in-between point. He doesn't really know what to do, if he should be more aggressive or if he should take a step back and kind of allow guys like Jaylen Brown to try and be more aggressive. Because there's a lot of people out there saying, well, JB needs to be more aggressive. He needs to go to the rim more and attack the paint. So then if Tatum hears that, maybe he's trying to take a step back. Because in this switch-heavy offense or switch-heavy defense that Utah has, he could take advantage of a lot of people on that perimeter. And I'm not saying Utah has a bad defense because they don't. They have a very good defense. But he didn't take advantage of that, and that's another question of his aggressiveness. So it's again, it all comes back to that inconsistency for me, and it's happening with a lot of guys on this roster.
Yeah. All right, fellas, let's wrap up with this because we had to talk about it. The third-string guys coming in early in the fourth quarter. Listen, I get it. You know, the game was a legitimate deficit, but it was still surprising to see Brad Stevens make that move. He stood by his decision. He said maybe it was a bad decision, maybe not, but I stand by it. Kyrie Irving sort of piggybacked the same thing, saying, hey, those guys deserve to play the way we were playing. Yeah. Where do you guys fall in this conversation? Do you think that it was the right move for Brad Stevens to pull his guys that early in the fourth quarter and play his third-string players?
I mean, it was a smart decision. I mean, they kind of went on a mini run.
Give us a little hope.
Yeah, so we gave him a little hope.
But then that's when you put in the starters, no? I mean,
I think you should run with what you have. I think you run with if it's working, you keep going with it. Obviously, they went on like a minute run or so. Yeah. But you had like Tice, you had Gershon doing pretty good. I think just the toughest part was defensively. Those guys weren't really doing so well defensively.
Yeah, and offensively, Brad Wanamaker just didn't look like the guy that you needed to have in the game in that moment. But that's just me. That's just my opinion.
There's bigger problems in that lineup. There's bigger problems.
I will say, speaking of lineup, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if you see a lineup change coming soon. You know, Hayward's talking about coming off the bench. There's a lot of guys that are just playing pretty stellar. Yeah. So who knows?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll continue to break down what happened with the Celtics and what's going to happen moving forward.